You know that feeling of sheer dread mixed with confusion when your doorbell rings and you see the unmistakable silhouette of a police uniform through the glass? Your mind immediately races through a catalogue of minor sins. Did I roll through that stop sign? Is my subscription to Extreme Lawn Gnome Monthly finally a crime? That was me last Tuesday. My heart did a little salsa right into my throat. But as I swung the door open, a deeper, weirder feeling started to creep in. These two officers, something was off. They had the uniforms, the badges, the utility belts laden with what I assumed were gadgets of justice. But the uniforms were a shade of blue, just a little too bright, like they'd been washed with a new, aggressive detergent. The badges had a cheap metallic sheen, the kind you see on costume shop props, and one of them, I swear to you, was wearing a pristine pair of white sneakers. Since when did patrol officers prioritize foot comfort over regulation polish?
The taller one, a guy with the posture of a confused heron, cleared his throat. "Sir, we're here concerning a complaint. You are in direct violation of a compliance order from the neighborhood authority." His voice was trying for authoritative but landed somewhere between a bouncer at a nightclub and a disappointed father. My brain, which had been frozen in a block of anxiety, suddenly cracked. The neighborhood authority. The tree. Brenda. This was her escalation. This was her nuclear option. She hadn't just sent a nasty email or levied another absurd fine. She had somehow procured 2 bargain bin, off-brand cops to strong-arm me into submission. The audacity was so breathtaking it was almost admirable. I felt a spike of fear, sure, but it was quickly being overtaken by a cold, simmering anger. I looked from his cheap badge to his partner's nervous eyes, and I asked the simplest, most obvious question I could muster. "Can I see your identification, your proper credentials?" The shift was instantaneous. The heron-like officer blinked. His partner, a stockier man who had been studying my welcome mat with intense interest, shuffled his white-sneakered feet. "We're, private contractors, employed by the Homeowners Association for community compliance matters," the first one stammered, his script clearly not having a line for this. Private contractors. They were rent-a-cops, security guards from some two-bit company that Brenda had probably found online, dressed up in the most legally ambiguous uniforms she could get away with. The fear was gone now, completely evaporated, replaced by a clear, focused purpose. I gave them a tight smile. "I see. Well, gentlemen, you'll have to excuse me for a moment." I closed the door, my hands trembling not from fear, but from pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I didn't call the HOA president. I didn't text my husband in a panic. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady as I tapped the screen, and I dialed 911. The dispatcher's calm voice was a stark contrast to the circus on my porch. "911, what is your emergency?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, hello. I'd like to report 2 individuals at my residence who are impersonating police officers. They are wearing uniforms and badges and have identified themselves as authority figures regarding a neighborhood dispute." I gave her my address and peeked through the blinds. The 2 officers were still there, looking profoundly unsure of their next move, probably waiting for a scene from their training video to start playing. The dispatcher confirmed a unit was on its way. Now, all I had to do was wait. The 10 minutes that passed felt like an hour. I watched the 2 men from my window. They mumbled to each other, occasionally glancing at their phones. They were probably getting an earful from Brenda, who was likely watching from her command post across the street, her curtains twitching. Then a new vehicle pulled up, a real sheriff's cruiser in the correct, dignified shade of dark blue, with the official county seal on the door. The man who stepped out was Deputy Miller. He had a quiet, no-nonsense authority that didn't need a raised voice or a puffed-out chest. He was probably in his 50s, with a calm, weathered face that had seen it all. He didn't even look at the 2 imposters at first. His eyes went straight to my front door. He walked right past them as if they were inconveniently placed shrubbery. I opened the door before he could knock. "Deputy," I said, "thank you for coming." I invited him inside, my eyes briefly flicking to the 2 men on the sidewalk, who now looked like they desperately wished they were anywhere else. I laid out the entire ridiculous saga for Deputy Miller. I started with the oak tree, a beautiful 50-year-old giant that provided shade for my entire backyard and was, according to city records, a protected heritage specimen. I told him about Brenda, the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, and her relentless campaign against the tree's very existence because it dropped leaves on her perfectly sterile, chemically green lawn. I showed him the paper trail, the increasingly unhinged emails, the official HOA violation notice demanding the tree's removal, and finally, the threat to escalate. I explained how this escalation had manifested as two men in poorly fitted uniforms showing up at my door, attempting to use the implied threat of state power to force me to destroy my own property. Deputy Miller listened patiently, his eyes taking in everything. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded occasionally, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp. When I was finished, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I see," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Okay, let me go have a word with these private contractors." He walked back outside, and I positioned myself by the window, a front-row seat to the justice I so desperately wanted to see. Deputy Miller approached the two men. He didn't yell. He didn't post up aggressively. He just stood there, a mountain of calm authority, and started asking questions. I couldn't hear everything, but I didn't need to. I saw the body language. The two men seemed to shrink. Their shoulders slumped. They started talking quickly, their hands gesturing in frantic explanation. Then I heard Deputy Miller's voice, clear and carrying in the quiet street. "Boys, do you have any idea what you're involved in? Impersonating a peace officer is not a parking ticket. It's a felony. It carries real jail time. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time. Who hired you?" It was like watching a balloon deflate. All the bravado, all the fake authority, just hissed out of them. The taller one immediately started talking, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush. He gave up Brenda's name, her address, everything. He said she'd contacted their private security firm, Metro Secure, and paid them a $200 service fee to come and ensure compliance with the HOA order, strongly suggesting they wear uniforms that were authoritative in nature. They were just following the client's instructions, they pleaded. They didn't know it was a serious crime. Deputy Miller listened, his face an unreadable mask. When they were finished, he pulled out his radio. The words he spoke into it were the most beautiful sentence I have ever heard. "Dispatch, this is Unit 42. I'm gonna need another unit too," he recited Brenda's exact address. "We have a resident here who appears to need a detailed lesson on the distinct difference between an HOA covenant and the state penal code. We'll be here awaiting their arrival." The triumph I felt in that moment was a physical, warming sensation. It was vindication. It was victory. The second sheriff's car arrived a few minutes later, and Deputy Miller had a brief conversation with the deputies inside. He then walked back over to the two imposters, who were now being formally detained. He came back to my door. "Mr. Evans," he said, "those two are going to be charged. They'll have their day in court. As for your neighbor, she is going to be formally interviewed regarding her role in conspiring to commit this crime. I suspect she'll be getting a court date of her own." I thanked him, my gratitude immense and genuine. He tipped his hat. "You did the right thing by calling us. Nobody gets to play dress-up with the law." The fallout was, as you can imagine, spectacular. The two Metro Secure officers pled guilty to misdemeanor impersonation charges, given their cooperation and their apparent lack of understanding regarding the severity of their actions. They got probation, community service, and a permanent stain on their records. But Brenda? Oh, Brenda. She was charged with criminal solicitation and conspiracy. The HOA, in a panic to distance itself from the massive liability and public embarrassment, immediately voted to remove her from the board and sent a formal letter of apology to every household, reaffirming that they do not and will not ever endorse illegal intimidation tactics. Her case is still winding its way through the system, but her reputation in this neighborhood is utterly and irrevocably destroyed. She's a pariah, the Karen who called the fake cops. She doesn't even make eye contact when she gets her mail. And my magnificent oak tree, it's still standing. Its roots are deep, its branches are wide, and every single leaf that drifts onto and yes, even Brenda's, lawn feels like a tiny green flag of victory. I look at it now, and I don't just see a tree, I see a monument. A monument to the fact that sometimes, when a petty tyrant tries to use fear and cheap theatrics to push you around, the most powerful thing you can do is stand your ground, pick up the phone, and let the real world introduce itself. The look on her face when the second sheriff's car pulled into her own driveway, the one she was so desperate to keep pristine and perfect? Well, that was the real prize. That was priceless.